As I said before I start, I want to dedicate this lecture tonight to Elie Wiesel. Tonight is his Yortzeit. His Yom HaZikaron. I also want to dedicate it to somebody you probably don't know, an old student of mine by the name of Chana Shofnas, who was niftar, who only died a few days ago, a little bit more than that, who I had the privilege to know and to teach over the many years. Very special lady who suffered a lot in the last years. I also want to say just a Baruch Haba to my good friend Professor Howard Wittstein. I can't claim that he specially came for this lecture from Los Angeles, but I am very proud and very honored that he is here. And I also want to mention my good friend Professor Yehuda Gelman, who is here, also somebody who I greatly admire, and I'm very impressed and taken back by his very being here. I want to thank Yael Vollier, Yael Shachar, and all the others who helped to make this possible tonight. Ilana Sinclair and the Dom Panorama Hotel, especially Zikalit, who gave us the opportunity of being here tonight and to get it organized. A few more things. You have found on your seats this cover of my new book. It will be out within the next few weeks, months and a half, so keep an eye on that, so that you obviously need to read it. You also found on your seats a prayer, which I wrote some time ago, for the shalom, for the very peace of mankind, because I believe that we Jews should give this a little bit more attention than we have been doing up till now. And I ask you to go to your Bet Knesset and ask them, the rabbi, the gabbai, whether or not they are prepared to say this after our tefillah for our chayalim, for our soldiers. We are the Am HaNivchar, we are the chosen people, and we need to be an example. As you already know, there are booklets out there behind me which you can take free. There's one specific booklet which is called Bible Criticism, which is an old writing of mine from many years ago, which is not updated, but somehow relates a little bit to the lecture tonight. And then there is something very important, and that is there are source sheets tonight. And I ask you to share them because we had a problem, and that is that our printer broke down after 150 copies. So if you be so kind, each one of you, to use one for 2 people, then perhaps it is a little easier to follow this lecture. There are also sheets which you can fill in with your name and your email address, because if chas v'shalom, you don't get my Salts to Ponder every Thursday, you better make sure you do. It doesn't cost any money. Just fill in your name and your email address, and you will get it from next week onwards. All free of charge, and when you go to our website, which is mentioned on the source sheet, you can find there many lectures, many writings, many videos, many audios, all of them about the Jewish tradition, Israel, and so on. Let me get to the topic tonight. A very serious topic. Many years ago, and those who come from Britain, from England, will probably still remember, a Manchester boy, Jewish boy, created a major crisis in British Jewry. And that spilled over even into America, also parts of Europe. And it was discussed in Jewish and non-Jewish papers. and it nearly brought down the British chief rabbinate. At the time it was Rabbi Brodie who was the chief rabbi of England. And this man who pulled that off was somebody who became very famous many years later by the name of Louis Jacobs. Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs. And this affair is called the Jacobs Affair. And it really basically nearly brought down the Orthodox community, or at least the official Orthodox community and its rabbinate. Louis Jacobs was born in Manchester, England, had a traditional kind of Jewish education, nothing special, but went off to Manchester Yeshiva, and because of his tremendous intellect, he ultimately made it to the Kollel, the High Rabbinical Institute in Gateshead, where I also studied, or at least in the Yeshiva, and became a major Talmid Chacham, one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim which walked around in our days. He passed away quite a few years ago. He got a PhD from the University College of London, became an Orthodox rabbi in Manchester Central Synagogue, and then the trouble started when he published a book of his which is called We Have Reasons to Believe. And that booklet, which at the beginning was more or less ignored, suddenly became a major issue when some people found that in one of the chapters, Louis Jacobs basically wrote that he was not sure that the Torah was divine, or at least that not all of it was divine, given by God at Sinai to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses. That brought Chief Rabbi Brodie in great trouble, because he wanted to appoint him as the chief rector, the chief of the Jews College, which is the official old rabbinical college for rabbis and teachers in England, and was more or less forced not to allow him to become this leader of this important institute. And there was even a chance that Louis Jacob was becoming the chief rabbi of England, and all that went down the drain once it became clear that he was not so sure about the foundations of Jewish tradition, and specifically the issue of Torah min ha-shamayim, as we call it in Hebrew, Torah from heaven. What Louis Jacobs was saying, tremendous scholar, was that there are good reasons to believe that this is not true. It may be true that certain parts of the Torah are min ha-shamayim, are from heaven, but definitely not everything. Why? Because there are clear indications in the text that the text is made from different documents, which over the many thousands of years were gathered together by some kind of a redactor, an editor, and then made it into one Torah as we have it today in the synagogue, but not all of it came down to Moses at Sinai. You can quite well understand that within the Orthodox community at the time, this was an explosion, that an Orthodox rabbi, which he no doubt was, and he always lived an Orthodox Jewish life, dared to say something like that, and even came up with very good arguments to make this specific point. And therefore, he indeed threatened the very mainstream Orthodox communities throughout the whole of England, and it indeed spilled over into Europe and later into America as well. When he died, he was considered, this may be a little mugzam, as they say in Hebrew, a little bit exaggerated, but the fact is that he was considered to be the greatest British Jew ever, which says something about the man himself. We have to understand that Louis Jacobs here touched a very serious, sensitive nerve, daring to say that the Torah is not completely, from Bereshit till the last pasuk in the Torah, in Devarim and Deuteronomy, is not all coming from God at Sinai, was indeed a major way to basically make a point that orthodoxy had it wrong. Now, I want to discuss this with you tonight, and this is a serious lecture. It takes about 10 hours. I brought it back to 5 hours, so I promise you, you will be out by 2:30 tonight. Truth is that this indeed is a very important question. Whether or not this Torah is partially, completely, or not at all the word of God given to Moses at Sinai. But when you start to look in all the different sources which we have, and we have loads of them, then you will see that the story is very different than what mainstream orthodoxy really always thinks about this, and what it claims to be. And I want to show you something of it, and show you some of my own insights in this. Now, there is one important point to make. This is not an academic lecture. For one good reason is that I don't believe it is an academic question. This belongs to religious philosophy and not to academics. And therefore we have to look to it from a very different perspective that perhaps university professors would do, who no doubt have a lot of very important things to say about this. But I believe that if we want to deal with this issue, we have to first of all understand that it is a religious issue which we need to tackle. After all, is it true or is it not true? And what does it mean that it is true? What are the implications of this very claim which has been made by mainstream Orthodox Jewish tradition? We need all of us, each one of us, to ask that question: do I believe it or don't I believe it? And whatever the consequences are, I will have then to think this whole issue all over again. And forgive me for saying so, it should really cause me and you sleepless nights. Because it is the question of to be or not to be. If God really spoke to us, well, then the implications are enormous. If he did not speak to us, the implications are also enormous, but in a very different sense of the word. So to walk out on this question and just to deny it is not going to help anybody of us. It is directly related to another question. What is the meaning of our lives? What is it the meaning of being Jewish? If it is from heaven, then probably it means that we are bound by the rulings and the commandments of the Torah, the 613 commandments, the Taryag Mitzvot, or not. And if it is not Mina Shamayim, or partially Mina Shamayim from heaven, what are the implications then? How does that work in our personal lives? What kind of Jewish life should we live? Or for that reason, should we not at all live a Jewish life and move into a secular way of living? One thing is clear, my dear friends. There is no escape of this question. There cannot be a denial of that question. And let's be honest, and I include myself in this, we often do. On the source sheets, you will find a statement made by Albert Camus, one of the great non-Jewish philosophers and writers, where he wrote the following statement. It's number 1 on your source sheets. There is only one philosophical question in this world. Hear this: to commit suicide or not? That's serious stuff. What Camus tried to say is, if indeed the world is a meaningless place and there's no higher order to all this, what is the point in trying to stay alive when we, most of us, have to suffer quite a lot? And the famous Abraham Joshua Heschel, who I'm sure you all have heard about, the great professor of Jewish philosophy at the Jewish Theological Seminar, responded by that in the following way, which you also have on your source sheet. May I differ, he writes. and suggest that there is only one serious problem, and that is martyrdom. Is there anything worth dying for? Are there values in our lives which are so important that if we have to violate them, we better give up our lives? And indeed, this is closely related to the topic tonight. Because if the Torah indeed is somehow divine, then it probably means that there is a higher meaning to this world and to our lives, and we should definitely hold out. But if there is none at all, and we are accidentally here, the question of Camus comes back to us. Why do you want to stay in this world? When this world, after all, is far from an easy place. And we choose know that better than anybody else. There is also a question which is closely related to this, and that is the question about morality. Very complicated question. And that is, if indeed the Torah does not give us any insight into what are the morals by which we should live, then the question stays, from where does morality come? An old question which goes back thousands of years. What is the touchstone of our morality? And I will put that a little bit in a different language than most of the philosophers have done. And I would say, indeed, what is there wrong, and I hope you get me, in killing a fellow human being, for example in a case when this person is suffering, in a merciful way? What is there wrong about this, if there are no absolute moral values? Am I allowed to kill an animal? Since when? Is it possible to claim that we can take the life of even a lower kind of life in the form of an animal, or a fly, or an insect? After all, it is alive. Who says that we are allowed to take it and just make an end to it? Am I allowed to make my wife pregnant when I know there are always risks involved in this matter? Am I allowed to bring a child in the world when I know beforehand that the child probably will undergo a lot of troubles through its life? Who says we have a right to do anything like that? And I tell you something which may be a little shocking. If I would be completely secular, I would not have had children. And I probably would not have married, for exactly that reason. And the reason why I did is because I believe that the Torah has something to say about it, where it tells us we should have children, we should get married, even when there are risks involved. And all of that is directly related to the question whether or not this Torah is, in some sense of the word, divine, telling us about a higher meaning coming from God, probably from Sinai. Or is there a way of living a moral life without God and without the Torah? Or is there a way that we can have God but no Torah? All of these questions are extremely important, to say it all a little different, as Heschel mentioned. If God, or better, if the Torah is not the word of God, then where is the word of God to be found? In the Quran, Lahavdil? In the New Testament? In Buddhism? In other forms of philosophy? It is all very important. And therefore, indeed, this issue is of the utmost importance when we think about our own lives. I'm always reminded of the famous story about Mordechai Kaplan, who was the man who started the Reconstructionist movement in America many years ago, in himself a great scholar, who actually did not believe in the Torah and did not believe in God either, at least not in the conventional sense of the word, but believed that we should continue to live a Jewish religious life after all, and even published a famous Siddur, a prayer book, telling people to speak to God in whom he basically did not believe. And the joke went around in the Jewish Theological Seminar that the first page of this Siddur stated, "To whom it may concern." Anyway, the question is very important, and it is not isolated. It is the question of our lives. But before I come back to Louis Jacobs, I want to make the following point. I can only tonight give you a direction how to think about all this. To really spell this whole thing out would need 10 hours. It would have to be a series of lectures. So all what I can do is to give you a direction. I want you, when you come home, to take the notes which you have in front of you with you, study them more carefully, think more about it. If you want, I can give you loads of books to read about it. It is the question of to be or not to be. I want to start with two important points here, before I go back and return to Louis Jacobs. One is made by Rav Kook, Avram Yitzchak Kook. You all know who he was, one of the greatest and most fantastic thinkers within the Jewish tradition, and chief rabbi of Palestine, as it was called at the time. And also one which is something which I think many philosophers have not thought enough yet about. Go to number 3 on your source sheet. In English, Rav Kook writes like this, relating to the whole concept of Torah min hashamayim, and actually going beyond that. He writes, and part of this is the general principle, here the chidush and the importance of this man's statement. And part of this is the general principle in the play of ideas, that when any concept that contradicts something from the Torah, we initially should not necessarily reject it. We should not straight away say, Jacobs is totally wrong, and he is an Apikoros, and he's a heretic, and we don't want to have anything to do with him. Rather, says Rav Kook, we should build the palace of Torah above it. It's a beautiful way of putting this. Building the palace of the Torah above it. The contradictory ideas thereby improve us and clarify the different opinions. Afterwards, when we are not pressured by anything, then we will be able to combat the idea with the wholehearted security we are in need of. In other words, what Rav Kook is saying here is we should never be afraid of any objection against our beliefs. We should in fact use it and rebuild on that the Jewish tradition in a way that we can include all that what authors have said about the Torah which we may not agree with. That indeed is most important. But there is also a very important matter here which I hope you understand well. I'll try to explain it as best as I can. Many modern thinkers argue that revelation, the concept of God coming to man and reveal himself, or at least his law to mankind, is an impossibility. Why? Because they say it requires the interference in the natural phenomena, in the way how normally the world runs by the laws of nature, and that therefore those people who believe that God once spoke in Jewish history at Sinai, and before and afterwards as well, but Sinai is the main occasion, are all somehow simplistic thinking people, because from a scientific perspective or from an historical general perspective, this cannot have happened. This, my dear friends, is a huge mistake, and I'll tell you why. Scientific reasoning is obviously tremendously important, but there is also a downside to it, and that is that it will always depend on laws that necessarily exclude, you know what I say, exclude the possibility of exceptions. The law of nature is absolute. It cannot allow for any exception. Any matter which is extraordinary, which is unprecedented, can't happen within that framework. But does that mean that therefore it could not happen outside that framework? Authentic revelation, and I hope well that you hear what I say, lacks any resemblance to anything else, the fact that God once spoke to all these people at Sinai many thousands of years ago, obviously there is nothing to compare it to where we can say it has happened again. We know it never happened again. Which means to say that it stands completely on its own. But in the Western worldview, which all of us are educated by, this is so not acceptable that we straight away come to the conclusion that the revelation, because we can't check it, there's no law of nature which can explain it, we therefore must come to the conclusion that it never happened. But if you really think a little closer, then there is really no reason to make that point. Because our minds have been indoctrinated to believe that that what cannot be replicated should not be taken serious. That is a mistake in the way in which we think within the West. I show you why I say this and why I could even prove it. You and I can never be implicated. There is nobody but only you who happens to be you. There is no other person like that, never was and never will be. You are the exception to the rule. The fact that we all have hands and a face and a nose doesn't mean to say that we have in anything something in common when it comes to our very being. There, everybody is totally different. And that is there that scientific knowledge doesn't help us, because science can only speak what we have in common, but not in that what we are totally different about. And therefore, belief in revelation has to be seen from that perspective. It is not a sign of progressive thinking to claim that it could not have happened a few thousand years ago. In the same way that you can't claim that somebody must be exactly like you before you believe that you are you. There is no such thing. But we constantly have to make that mistake. Belief is the revelation, in revelation, depends to our openness to wonder, to amazement, to stand in shock, to realize suddenly that this world in itself is an unbelievable miracle and a mystery which we cannot really explain, not even by scientific inquiry. And therefore we must for a moment realize that when our great-grandparents claimed that something happened at Sinai a few thousand years ago, there is nothing to reason against them by telling them that that could not have been the case because we did not experience it. In fact, I believe that is a mental shutdown and a shut-off of the modern mind. We must realize that on the end of the day, things can happen which never repeat themselves. That they are not open to scientific inquiry has got nothing to do with the question whether or not it actually happened. This is very important to realize when we speak about the whole concept of Torah min hashamayim and the revelation of God at Sinai a few thousand years ago. This just as an introduction. But to come back to Louis Jacobs. Louis Jacobs said the Torah is probably partially coming down from Sinai. But not everything. Why? Because there are sources within the Torah, we shall see later more about that, which seem to indicate differently. And why was it that the Orthodox mainstream community was so terribly upset with him? Because they relied on the greatest Jewish philosopher ever by the name of the Rambam, Maimonides. And as you all know, in the famous 13 principles of faith of Maimonides, in the 8th principle, Maimonides makes a straightforward statement telling us that the whole of the Torah, as we have it today in the synagogue, came down to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses at Sinai a few thousand years ago, and there cannot be any dispute about this. That is what Maimonides says in the Yud Gimel Ikarim, in the 13 principles of faith. As you know, and I've spoken about that before, and probably some of you were there, Maimonides believed that there are 13 principles of faith. That is, 13 dogmas on which the Jewish tradition stands. But my dear friends, if you look right through the whole of Jewish tradition, you will find that there are no dogmas within the Jewish tradition. There are beliefs, but these beliefs are very flexible. They move from one way to the other. Nothing is at all clear when it comes to emunah. It all depends who you ask. Maimonides probably wrote down the 13 principles of faith because at the time the Jewish people were attacked by the Muslims, the Islam, and also by the Christians, asking, what do you believe? We know what we believe. We as Christians believe in this and that. We as Muslims, we believe this and that. But what do you believe? And the interesting thing is that the Jews responded, no idea. We never dealt with that. We live in according to the halakha, which is partially stated within the Torah, within the written law and in the oral law. That's what we live by. We never discussed the question what and how when it came to the concept of belief. This is open-ended. There are no absolute conclusions to this. And this is what you see right through the whole of earlier Jewish tradition until Maimonides, who suddenly, for understandable reasons, made an end to this discussion and said, no, this and this and this is exactly what you need to believe, including the fact that the whole of the Torah as we have it today came down from Moses at Sinai. But if you look to the sources before Maimonides, my dear friends, you will see that this was not at all an accepted dogma which everybody stood by. In fact, there are whole loads of rabbis before and after Maimonides who took issue with Maimonides and said, from where do you get that? True, there are some statements in the Talmud which says clearly that the whole Torah is from beginning to end, Mina Shamayim, coming down at Sinai to Moses. But there are authors, and also in Midrashim, and also oral forms of our Torah, which tell us a very different story. It is not all coming down from Mount Sinai. I mentioned a few very famous people. Rabbi Shem Tov Shaprut, who disagreed with Maimonides. Solomon Franco, Elazar ben Matithias, Yaakov Chaim Sofer, Yehuda HaChazit, one of the most famous great rabbinical figures. Victor Katz, who was the teacher of Rabbi Meir Rothenberg. All of them said it is possible that parts of the Torah were introduced into the text later on. Or by the prophets, the Nevi'im, or by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, the people who are at that time, at that moment, running the Jewish community, or even by Muslim people. What they all agree on, most important, is that it was still done the Ruach HaKodesh. It was still done by divine inspiration, but not in the sense that word of word, this was dictated by God to somebody, but it was given over by God in one way, and the rabbis of these days, or the prophets at these days, wrote it down in their own words. Like we also say about the Nevi'im, the prophets later on, when the Talmud says, Ein Navi mit Naveh be'oto siknon, which means to say, no prophet prophesies in exactly the same matter. Why? Because the word of God filters through their personalities, and in that way they wrote things down. But that didn't mean to say that therefore every word came exactly down from God to them in these very words. Each one did it in his own way, as he as a personality felt it, understood it, and passed it on to the next generation. And these people Those who disagree with Maimonides are therefore saying it is very possible that that also happened to part of our Torah, and that therefore not every word in the Torah came specifically down from Mount Sinai, as Maimonides seems to claim. More than that, hear this. One of the great Hasidic thinkers, outstanding, was somebody by the name of Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, quite late in Jewish history, who wrote a sefer, a book, and that is your number 4, but it is only in Hebrew, and you can read it yourself afterwards. I have no English translation of that, but I tell you in a few words what this man writes. If he would have written this today, they would have excommunicated him. Because Reb Tzadok HaKohen in his work called Pri Tzadik writes like this. He says this on Parashat Yitro, where the Torah is given, as you remember, the 10 Commandments is given. And there this man makes an unbelievable statement. Now it's a little difficult to fully understand what he's trying to say. The language is hard. But the way I understand it, and I think I'm correct, is this. He says, what is this Yitro, the father-in-law of Moses, doing in this story? Why does he suddenly enter into the Torah? We even call a whole parasha after him, a parasha after him. Is he so important? This is a Gentile. True, later on, according to our tradition, he converted into the Jewish tradition. And by the way, there is another tradition that he walked out again. I shall not go into this now. But whatever it may have been, he was the father-in-law of Moses. And there, Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen says the following. You know why this man is so important in the Jewish tradition? Because he brought wisdom of the non-Jewish world to Moses, which then afterwards Moses introduced and moved into the text of the Torah. That's quite a statement to make. Moses was able to do this with the permission of God. When there is some wisdom coming from a totally different world, Yitro's world, but there is Chokhmah there is no doubt wisdom there. He brings this to Moshe, and Moses makes this part of the text of the Torah. Now this is not a reform rabbi, Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen. This is a deeply Hasidic master of incredible intellectual and spirituality who makes that point. And if you ask me the question, which is a good question, but wait a moment, did Yitro not only enter into the Jewish community after Sinai, when the Torah was already given, and not beforehand? This is a very complicated story. I can't go into this now, but I remind you, for those who know, we have a principle in the Torah or in the rabbinical tradition, ein mukdam umruchar b'Torah. There is no earlier and later in the Torah, and therefore it is, in according to Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen at least, that he already arrived before Sinai. And therefore, at the time, in case Moses all wrote it down at the time, Moses took and was independent enough with the permission of God to introduce what he calls the nitzotzot, which means the spark of the non-Jewish world, introduced them, made them part of the text of the Torah. And you remember the whole story when Yitro goes to Moses and tells him, you are doing this wrong, the way how you are judging the people, you need this to do in a different way. Then you have one example clearly stated in the Torah itself. And in fact, the Talmud says, although the Talmud says this in a little different way than Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen seems to claim, Moshe mipnei atzmo Amram. There were things which Moses said on his own and made it part of the text. Always the point is being made there that God said to him, go and do it. You know why? And I come later back to this. Because we together are writing the Torah. Not me alone, not you alone, but in a combination of a human effort together with a divine effort. And then he says something even more remarkable. You know about Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet, who is compared to Moses and is nearly compared to him as great as Moses is, which is a remarkable statement to make. Says Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, you know what the difference is between Moses and Bilam? Moses was allowed to add his own stuff in the Torah. Because he was so great that God said you can do it. But Bilam was not so great. And therefore he was not allowed to do that. He could only say literally what God put into his mouth and nothing more. But Moses was on a different Ramah, on a different religious and spiritual level, and he was able to do that. That's also a tremendous chidush. A novel idea by Rabbi Tzadok Cohen, but that is simply what he says. Now you may, the Talmudist under you may come and say, but Rabbi Kadozo, is there not a clear-cut statement in the Gemara, in Sanhedrin 99a, where it says that anybody who dares to say that even one letter of the Torah, and that is number 5 on your sword sheets, if he says that even one letter of the Torah was not given by God to Moses at Sinai, he is a heretic. But my dear friends, the truth about this is that this is a statement which is a polemic. It was probably a polemic against Christianity. Making that claim does not agree with many other claims in the Jewish tradition. It was made by the rabbis to make sure that Christianity later on would not come and change all the commandments in the Torah, as they did, and therefore they made this harsh statement, but you can't take this on face value and just say that because of that reason there cannot be any debate about this. In fact, the Talmud says at certain occasions Moses entered certain ideas of his own within the Torah, and probably even coming from a man called Yitro, his father-in-law. Now that already opens up a whole different story about what this Torah is. Remember, it is still a divine Torah, but the divinity of the Torah came about in a different way than mainstream orthodoxy constantly complains or claims when it builds its whole attitude on Maimonides, who doesn't want to hear of this. But however great Maimonides is, we do not have to accept him as the final opinion in this particular case, specifically when we have other very important sources which seem to oppose him. But let's move on. Let's for a moment put on the table the problems within the text, which has been discussed by loads of scholars in the past and today. There's first of all something that we call Bible critique, Bikoret HaTanakh, which is still taught in many universities, including here in Israel. It makes the point, as we mentioned before, that the Torah is made from different kinds of documents which were gathered over the many years, written by many different people, and therefore the different styles and different kind of Hebrew and so on. And the first man who decided or who made that point was the famous Baruch Spinoza in Amsterdam. He must be seen more or less as the father of Bible critique. He was not very good in it, to be quite honest, but he was no doubt a father. Afterwards, many years later in Germany, there was a man by the name of Julius Wellhausen, who came out with a major work, which is called the Documentary Theory, where he went far beyond Spinoza, and basically said that nothing ever was coming down or came down to Moses at Sinai. He seems even to deny that Moses ever existed. And if anybody, which Spinoza also claimed, was possibly responsible for the text, it was Ezra HaSofer. Ezra, the scribe, many hundreds of years after Moses. That's one problem. And there are many people till this very day who indeed accept this point of view, that the Word of God is actually not the Word of God. It is a document, many documents together, pulled together into one text, which is the text which we have in our synagogues. That's problem number one. Then there is problem number two, which lately has been discussed a lot, and that are moral problems in the Torah. There's the Agunah problem. The problem why only a man can give a get to his wife and not the other way around. The Mamzer problem. The bastard. The wrong translation, but you all know what I'm speaking about. The question about Amalek, the nation which needs to be destroyed by us, including women and children. Not a small moral problem. Then we have something which you probably know about, is Ir HaNidachat, the city which, according to the Torah, needs completely to be destroyed because all its inhabitants have been involved in idol worship. Then you have the famous case of Ayin Tachat Ayin, eye for eye. You all know, and I suppose you have enough Jewish education for that, that all of these laws have been applied in totally different ways than they appear in the text. But if you read the text literally within the Torah, you should be terribly disturbed about all this, because there are major moral problems. There are also some problems within the very stories of the Torah. Think about the way how Abraham seems to save his own life by telling a lie to Abimelech when his wife is being taken in by him. Highly problematic story. Or Tamar and Yehuda, daughter-in-law, father-in-law. And then there is also another problem still, which is the finding of archaeology. There, so we are being told, is more or less a claim that there is nothing within biblical archaeology which shows that the Jews walked 40 years through the desert. We didn't find any evidence for this. And so many other things where the Torah makes certain claims, historical claims, these people are of the opinion that there is nothing within scientific inquiry and archaeology which in any way proves this point, not even half. It is not true. These are the big issues which are discussed today. Now I want first of all to tell you the following. I'm sure you've all heard about Professor James Kugel. James Kugel was a Harvard professor for many years who taught Bible, very, very popular lectures he gave, where hundreds if not thousands of people used to attend. And later, and now, is a professor of Bible at Bar Ilan. He happens to be, I know him personally, is a fantastic person, to be an Orthodox Jew. But he taught, and I don't go into this now, he taught Bible critique. Basically teaching that the Bible is made, or the Torah is made, from many different kinds of documents. And when he was once asked, how can you teach that while you are an Orthodox Jew? He made a very interesting comment, which I want to share with you. There's more to it than I can explain now. He said basically the following. There are two ways how to look to the Torah. You can look to it from an academic point of view, and you can look to it from a religious point of view. And these two should never get mixed up, because one has got nothing to do with the other. And to explain himself well, he made a mashal, a parable. He says, he mentioned the following. You find an album of pictures of your great-great-great-grandparents, a long time ago, black-white, and you start to look to them. What you obviously do is, you give an interpretation into that particular picture. You see your great-great-grandparents there, you see them at the beach, and you suppose that this and this has happened, and that is what this particular picture reflects. We all do that. But asked Professor James Kugel, what happens if under the picture your great-great-grandfather gave a little explanation of what this picture is all about? And what you will find is that very often that explanation changes completely your understanding of what you saw up till now. Because he puts a perspective on it which you never for yourself could ever find out. In other words, the perush, the explanation of this particular photo changes in your mind the whole purpose or the whole meaning and the whole reflection of what this picture is all about. Says Professor Kugel, there lies the problem. From an academic point of view, when we look at the Bible, in the Torah, we have only one thing, the text. We're not asking about who wrote a perush under it to explain what it means. No, the Bible is the text, and that's all what we have. And on the basis of that, we come to the following conclusions, which means that it was probably made by different people over many thousands of years. But, says Professor Kugel, if you start to look at it from a religious perspective, a Jewish religious perspective, then you will have to take into account what we call in Hebrew the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. And you know quite well that the moment you start to use the oral Torah, and by that way you look into the text, the whole text gets a different color. It is a question of whether or not you are prepared to believe your great-grandfather when he wrote these words under the picture. What this means, my dear friends, is this, and I think that's often forgotten. Bible critics, like Wellhausen, or for that reason Spinoza and many afterwards, they said we have only one thing, and that's the text. Nothing more. They were not out to try to prove that the Torah is not divine. That never came up in the discussion. It was never a possibility to them. They took it for granted that this was written by man, and now afterwards we have to find out how did it come together. But from a religious Jewish perspective, the story is totally different. We read it from a religious perspective via the focus of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, and then the whole picture totally and completely changes. So said Professor Kugel, the academics, they're right. In their own way, they're absolutely right. When they come to the conclusions on the basis of the text, they're absolutely right. But the religious are also right when they say this is not at all how we read this text. This text needs to be read from a very different perspective, and they're also right. They don't even clash. They belong to totally different categories. And that's most important. Now, if you go to number 6 on your source sheet, you will find a statement which I'm not going to read to you because it will take too long, by a very famous philosopher at Princeton University by the name of Walter Kaufmann, who was one of the greatest Nietzsche experts in his field, a Jew. No interesting story, this man, how he found out that he was a Jew. I won't go into this now. When he writes about Bible criticism, and it's not religious at all, he makes one statement which indeed shows that he understood what was going on. And I only want to read with you the last line in this statement of his on the very end, where he quotes Goethe, the great German poet. What issues from a poetic mind wants to be received by a poetic mind. If you don't know what poetry is, if you're not a poet, you can't read poetry. And then he says like this is the problem with the Bible critics. They are not poets. They are not people who know how to read poetry. They don't read the Bible as poetry. They read it as an historical text which developed. But then he says, if you have no poetic mind, how are you going to read something which at least can be compared to poetry? And the Bible, no doubt, must be, and definitely the Torah, must be compared to poetry. If you don't have a poetic mind, forget about understanding it. And if you continue to read with me a little lower, any God analyzing destroys the poetry and does not generate any reality. All that remains are potsherds, which are good for nothing and only incommode us. This is his critique as a secular person on the world of Bible criticism. This is not the way how you read the text. You want to do it? Fine. But in the first, admit at least that you're not a poet. But remember one thing, you're reading poetry. Religious poetry. So how and what do you want to do over here? You only incommode us, you only make it more problematic without getting anywhere. But now I will move on to something very fascinating. If you look in Jewish mystical teachings, what we call the Kabbalah, you will hear, and now hear well what I say. You will read that the Kabbalah maintains that the Torah, which we have in our synagogues, and which was given, at least in according to Maimonides, at Sinai to Moses, and passed on to the Jewish people, is not the real Torah. The Torah which you and I read Shabbat morning, Parashat HaShavua, is not the real Torah. What do the Kabbalists mean by that? They say that when God gave the Torah to Moses, it was not the real one. So what was it? Says the Kabbalah, it was a translation and an adaptation of the real one. Because what is the real one? Here, this fascinating concept. The real one is the mind of God. When God thinks, for the lack of a better way of putting it, he thinks Torah. That is the real Torah. It is divine on a level which we cannot cope with, which we cannot touch, which we do not understand, because it is something nothing to do with human thought, logic, reasoning, or whatever it is. It is something which takes place within, again for the lack of a better word, the brain of God, and whatever God thinks, all words which are not eloquent enough, he is thinking Torah. And that is the real Torah, which the Kabbalists call in English, or sorry, in Hebrew, Torah Keduma, the primordial Torah. I once wrote a small booklet about this. Going beyond that, what the Kabbalists are saying is that when Moses went to the top of Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, God shows him only white fire, which again is a symbol. God is white fire, infinite white fire. And Moses there claims to God, or complains to God, and says to God, if this is the Torah, I'm going back home empty-handed, because there's nothing written there. It may be your thoughts, but we can't get to your thoughts. So what do you want from me? So God says, I will translate this white fire, which is my mind, the symbol of my mind, my DNA, if that's perhaps the best way of putting it. And I will translate it in a way that when I translate it, it will adapt to the human conditions, will be put into human words, will be written into human narratives with human commandments, completely ready for human beings to accept. But remember, all of this is an adaptation and a translation of what my mind is all about. What you're reading is my mind, but in a translation. Now, this has enormous consequences if you think about this. This is a tremendous chiddush coming from the Kabbalists. Because what they are saying is the following. What we call in this world the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is in fact already oral Torah. Because it is already an adaptation and an explanation of what God is thinking. So all the Torah Sheba'al Peh which we have is not only what we call the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Midrash, but it is also the very Sefer Torah which we find in the Heichal, in the Aron HaKodesh, in our shuls. Because the real one is not known to us, because it is God's thoughts. Now God needs to translate that in a way that Moshe then will say, okay, now I understand what you're speaking about. But you had to translate it in my language, the Lashon B'nai Adam, as we say in Hebrew, and therefore you came up with this particular story and this particular commandment. But I know that this is not the real thing. But it's all what I can cope with and what I can deal with. And God says to Moses, indeed, that's what you're taking down. So what are you taking down? You are taking down a translation of my mind, and I want you to know that when you read it, be aware this is an adaptation and a translation, and it is not the real thing. Now if you think about that, then you get obviously into all sort of speculation. And that is this. For example, do we now have to believe that all the stories in the Torah actually happened in history? The answer will be that on the basis of this Kabbalistic insight, we can claim that much of what is written in the Torah as if it is history is in fact not history at all. It is purely a way how God wrote it down in a way that we understand it by way of a story, which is a form of a mashal, of a parable, but not something which really happened in every sense of the word. Because what really happens only happens in the mind of God. Because God is the only one who is real. Anything after that is only some kind of reflection of something, but the real thing is only to be found in God. And you and I say this every day in our tefillot on the end of Aleinu L'Shabeach, when we say, Ein od mile bado. There is nobody outside him, which can also be translated, there is nothing outside him. And the Kabbalists are indeed of the opinion that all what we think is, in fact, does not exist if you compare it to the greatness and the existence of God, because God is the only one who is real existence, because it is infinite. But you and I, we are all conditionally existing. Our world, our universe is only conditional. Now that changes the very story about the Torah and all what is written in the Torah in a very drastic way. And if you be so kind to go to number 7 in your source sheet, you will see something very interesting there. It is stated by one of the great Kabbalistic thinkers by the name of Rabbi Avram Azulai in a book called Chesed LeAvraham, one of the major Kabbalistic works. And just read with me a few lines, not more than that. Number 7. In regard to the new interpretation of the Torah that God will reveal in a Messianic age, we may say, hear this, that the Torah remains eternally the same. That is to say, within God it will be what it is, but in the beginning, after the fall of Adam and Chava, it assumed the form of material combinations of letters which were adapted to the material world. Now what this Rabbi Avram Azulai is trying to say over here is something very interesting. He is saying that the letters as we have them today and the break-up of the letters as we have them today, Bereshit, Bara, Elohim, in the beginning did God create heaven and earth, is only one possibility of reading it, depending on where we find ourselves in the story. Meaning to say, we need material ways of understanding these words, so it is translated, in the beginning did God create heaven and earth. But on a higher level, it may be a combination of the same letters broken up differently, creating therefore a different text while using the same letters, which will be a higher translation of God's mind. And who knows how many translations there are. We have only one, the one in our synagogue. But that's not the first one and that's not the last one. Because in the days of the Mashiach, when everything in according to the Kabbalah will drastically change, we will be in need of a much higher text, which we will have to read within the Torah, where these letters are broken up differently, creating a language which at this moment we cannot yet read, but will be able to read in the future. And then he does something very remarkable, number 8 in your text. where he speaks about one commandment. This comes from Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, a remarkable observation, where he says the following. And according to the Kabbalah, Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, also had the Torah, but not the Torah which Moses received at Sinai. It was a Torah on a much higher level, because as long as they had not yet eaten from the tree of knowledge, they had a very different and much higher level of reading and understanding things, closer to God's mind than we have it. And therefore he asked the following question. When it says in that Torah that you are not allowed to wear shatnez, linen and wool in your garments, how are Adam and Eve going to read this? They're naked. They don't need any garments. So this is meaningless to them. So when you and I read shatnez, tzema or vishti, the combination or the mixture of wool and linen, it can't be that Adam and Eve read it the same way, because they would not know what you're speaking about. So Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, brought by Rabbi Avram Azurai, says that therefore the letters shatnez, tzema or vishti will have to be broken differently, so that you can read this afterwards yourself in greater lengths. You don't read anymore shatnez, tzema or vishti, a mixture of wool and linen, but you read Satan, as, metzar, utovsi. Same letters. The combination, says Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, is not exactly the same, or better, the follow-up of the letters have been moved around, and there's a whole theory behind it which I shall not tell you about because it will take much too long. When you're allowed to do that and when you're not allowed to do that. But Satan, as, metzar, utovsi means the isolate Satan, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, will let out a power which will create affliction, which will bring you to Gehenna. Meaning to say this, my friends, that when Adam and Eve started to eat from the tree of knowledge, they were told, don't get involved in shatnez. But not in the form of linen and wool, but don't mix up the higher world with the lower world. Hear what I say? The higher world with the lower world, which works as bad as linen to wool and wool to linen. One is agriculture, one comes from the animal world. Because if you do that, you run yourself down and get yourself into tremendous trouble. That is what they read, says Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, when they read Satan as metzar utovsi, which we read today as shatnez, tzema or vishti. And so he says, it is with the totality of the Torah. If you would go through the Torah and you would cut up the letters differently, which by the way the Ramban does at the beginning in his Pirush on the Torah, only a little bit, you will see that a whole different story and a whole different text comes about, but the same letters are still there, because ultimately they are all translations of God's mind put into human terminology. But how more the human being comes down, the more it needs to have a material expression. And the more a human being will go up, like in the case of the Messianic age, according to the Kabbalah, the more it will become a spiritual text. It will no longer be the very text that you and I read at this moment, and the Baal Koreh reads at this moment, in the Torah itself. Which brings me straight away to archaeology. Did 600,000 people walk in the desert? Or perhaps 2 million? 600,000 men, 600,000 women, and then a lot of children, elderly people? Or did they not? And according to the Kabbalah, there is no need to say that they did. It may have been 60 people. It may have been 600 people. Remember one thing. As many commentators already make the point, the letter 6 has a tremendous symbolic meaning. It is not to be taken literally. But if it is indeed a translation of God into human terminology, and the whole story of from walking from Egypt to Israel for the 40 years is a reflection of God's mind, then you need to ask the question, obviously, did they or did they not? But even when you come to the conclusion that they did not, that does not mean to say that therefore the Torah is not telling the truth, But it is telling a truth on a much higher level, which is not the historical level on which we normally read it and understand it. If we say, or better in the olden days when we used to say something like, have a good life ad mea veschi, nobody means that you really should make it till 120 years. It means, may you get old. Moshe became 120 years old, but we even don't know that for sure, because it may be that 120, which is twice 60, has a completely different meaning. So if indeed it may be that the Jews walked through the desert, and I come to that in a moment, you have to ask yourself if there were only 6 people or 60 people or 600 people. How is archaeology going to find any evidence for that? But I remind you of something else as well. What does the Torah say? You have it in front of you in mine, only in the Hebrew. The Torah says that while the Jews were walking around in the desert, it says the following: your garments did not veer out upon you, and your feet did not swell these 40 years. Very famous passage. Rashi says there that the clouds of glory used to wash their clothes while they were walking around 40 years and press them, making them look like new, freshly preserved, and their young, I'm here quoting Rashi, too, as they would grow up, their garments would grow with them, like the closing of the shell of a snail, which grows with it. Now, my friend, yes or no? Or we believe that the Jews walked through the desert, then it means to say that they walked with 6 million, and then we have a problem about why don't we have any evidence. But if the Torah is telling us that the whole thing was a complete miracle from beginning till end, because they didn't walk the normal way through a desert like we would walk through it, and our clothes would at a certain moment just dry out or no longer be fitting. Now, if the Torah tells us, as the Torah clearly says, and that is, it all grew with you, what kind of evidence do you want to find for a miracle in the desert? This is very important to remember. So the archaeological argument, in my opinion, doesn't work at all. Because it may quite well be that, or they did not at all walk through the desert, I'll come to this in a moment, or only a few people walked around, but even when loads of them walked around, if the whole thing was a miracle, science doesn't work as miracles, archaeology is not working as miracles, so therefore it is not an archaeological question at all. So what do you want from us? Scientific reasoning, once more, is based on the fact of the laws of nature. If the laws of nature did not function at the time of the 40 years in the desert, as the Torah seems to say, so what do you want? But there is something else here. This is a little bit of a dangerous theory. I'll tell you why. Because if we would follow the Kabbalistic point of view, it could mean that on the end of the day we would have to deny that anything which is written in the Torah ever happened. Which would include that Avram, Yitzhak and Yaakov never existed. Which would include that the story at Mahar Sinai, Mountain Sinai, did never take place. The Kriyat Yamsuf, the very splitting of the Red Sea, is only seen in a purely symbolic form. It would undermine, here well, the history of the Jewish people totally and completely. To the point that we may have to argue, hear this is the danger behind this theory, that even the land of Israel in which you find yourself at this very moment can't be claimed on the basis of the Torah, for the Torah was not speaking about Eretz Israel in the physical terms, which would give our enemies a lot of good stuff to work with. The only answer to that can be this, that the Torah is a combination of historical facts and at the same time a reflection of higher forms and of higher spiritual conditions which are not reflected in that very history. In other words, it is a combination of a little bit of history and a lot of other stuff which does not belong to the world of history at all. And if he would read it like that, he can claim, and there's no need to deny that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov definitely existed. Whether or not all the stories about them really took place, we don't need to claim that at all. But we are not undermining by that the Jewish tradition, because we can still argue it all came from Sinai, but Sinai means to say that God translated and adapted his thoughts within a form of a narrative, but the narrative only took place within God's mind and did not take place down here on earth. Something probably must have happened at Har Sinai, at Mount Har Sinai. And sometimes, somehow, we must have been walking around 40 years in the desert. Nobody knows how many. Or it is higher stuff, or it is lower stuff, or it is the combination of the stuff. It is all purely kosher, as we say. And nobody can claim, even when Maimonides tells us differently, that there is anything wrong about making that claim, and it would solve a lot of problems. That's the way how the Kabbalists work. But don't think I came to the end of this lecture. There is a whole different way of looking to this, which was actually started by Maimonides. You all know this. Remember the famous statement which Maimonides made about the sacrifices in the temple, where in the Guide for the Perplexed, he claims the following. He's terribly attacked for this, but he makes a claim. He says you should know that korbanot, the sacrifices in the temple, are really not very Jewish. They don't really belong in the Torah. So how did they get in the Torah, says Maimonides in the Guide? Because since our great-grandparents a long time ago were used to serve their idols by way of korbanot, by way of sacrifices, God said, I can't yet take this all away in once from you. I will allow you to continue to bring this korbanot to me, under all sorts of different conditions, and first of all only in the temple, but it is really only something which, to use another expression, a compromise to human weakness. A compromise to human weakness. God says, okay, I give in. You can continue to bring the korbanot. But don't think that this is the way how to serve. I allow you this for a moment, and Maimonides clearly indicates that once we grow out of this, when we grow up, we won't have any sacrifices anymore. Now you may say to me, you're absolutely right, but in the Mishneh Torah of Maimonides, he seems to say the reverse. Because there he says that in the days of the Mashiach, we will start again with the korbanot. And I shall not go into this now, I've written a long article about it. If you want, I can give it to you, how to reconcile these two views. But Maimonides is saying very clearly that there are laws in the Torah which at the time were necessary when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, but later on were no longer to be applied. Or to give you another example, which Maimonides, for reasons I'm not clear about, should have given as well, and that is the whole concept of slavery in the Torah, Avdut. We still have slavery in the Torah, 7 years, 6 years, 7 years, and so on. Obviously, nobody's going to claim in the future, as far as I know, that the greatest mitzvah is to get slaves again when we are in the Messianic age. Slaves were at the time a necessity for the economy, which mankind had to grow out of, till, as we do today, at least in the West, where we are no longer in need of slaves. So again, what Maimonides, or what I'm saying here, is it is a compromise to human weakness, because at the moment that the Torah was given, there was still a need for slaves, and there was still a need for korbanot. But it doesn't mean to say that in 1,000 years later, this book, this Torah would have been given, and now hear well what I say, that the Torah would still have included korbanot sacrifices, or would have included slavery. Perhaps the text would have been different. Nobody says that the text at the time was the divine text, but the divine text is depending on the condition, the human condition at the time when it took place, which was at Sinai a few thousand years ago. I take you a step first. The Sforno, Obadiah Sforno, one of the great Italian philosophers and commentators on the Torah, happened to say the same thing about even something more radical. He says, and you have it in front of you, but only in Hebrew, number, what is it? 11, where he says like this. When were the laws of kashrut, of eating kosher, given? Says, in according to Seforno, after the incident with the golden calf. Not before, but after. And why? What did the golden calf do to the Jewish people? It brought the whole of the Jewish people down to a much lower level. And then he makes a fantastic statement, the Seforno, and he says, only then God decided to give the laws of kashrut. You know why? If you are ill, you need a diet. Meaning to say that as long as the Jews had not yet served the idol of the golden calf, they were on a very high level, and it didn't matter at all if you were eating kosher, yes or no, because it would not have any effect on your neshama, on your soul. And the Jews were eating non-kosher. But now that afterwards this whole incident happens with the golden calf, and the Jews came down on a level that's lower level, they became mentally or spiritually sick, they were in need of a diet. So God says, I better make sure what you eat and what you don't eat, because if you eat the wrong thing, it may have an effect on your soul and on your behavior, and therefore kashrut is introduced. So says the Seforno. Rabotai, this is an unbelievable statement by the Seforno to make something like that, because he's doing the same thing what Maimonides does. He says it all depends on when the Torah is given. In other words, here it is, if the Seforno, or better, if the whole story of the golden calf would not have taken place, you and I would not have been eating kosher. And there would not have been a need for it. And if the Torah would have been given before the incident of the golden calf, and again there's a lot of trouble about this, yes or no, before or afterwards, then the Torah would have been much shorter. Why? Because all the laws of the korbanot and all the laws of the kashrut would not have been part of this very text which we have today. There is nothing wrong about saying this, in according to those who believe that this is like the Seforno and Rambam seems to claim. Now, hear well what I say. Don't think that therefore today you can say, okay, in that case I don't need to eat kosher. I'm on a level I can do so. There's no such thing. And here you bring number 30, which I didn't translate for you. The Mehashiloah. The Mehashiloah was one of the great Hasidic rabbis along 100, 200 years ago, who says a remarkable thing. It is true, and by the way, Maimonides also says this in the Modin Aruchim, it is true that not all the commandments work for you and for me. Some of them don't work with us. Does that mean that I shouldn't observe them? Says the Mehashiloah, no, that doesn't mean it at all. Because we are a people. And there is something called conformity. And I keep the laws of the Torah, even when they don't work for me, for the sake of my neighbor next door, to whom it does work. We are living in conformity, we are a community. We all need to eat kosher. Why? Because there are some people who really need to eat kosher. Even when I don't need to eat kosher, he needs to eat kosher, and therefore I must eat kosher as well, for the sake of my neighbor. That is what the Mehashiloah, not a Reform rabbi, says. But here it is. What they are all claiming one way or the other is, and I want you to hear this well, if the Torah would have been given in according to Maimonides, 1,000 years later, the Torah would have been a different text than the one which we received at Sinai. If Sinai would have repeated itself, we would have for the second time got a different text, in according to the level where we would find ourselves at that moment, or lower or higher, depending on our spiritual condition. So here, and I will read out what I wrote not so long ago, my own words. So the text of the Torah is human in the sense that it is the human condition that will determine what will appear in the divine text and what will not appear in the divine text. We are the ones to decide on. And God will follow along, saying, okay, if that's what you are, I will have to give the text this way. And if you are different from that, then I will have to give you the text another way. But then the question comes, with you obviously asking me, if that's the truth, then why did the Torah God not give the Torah the second time? For our conditions. Without korbanot at least. And some also matters. Now here we get to a most fascinating concept. And if you go now to number 14, you will see something very remarkable. I won't read the whole thing. What it says is this. When the Torah was given to Moses, that what we call the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, it was given in the form of a measure of wheat and a bundle of flax. A measure of wheat and a bundle of flax. What does that mean? It means the following. Imagine a king who takes a bundle of flax and a bundle of wheat, and he goes to his servants and he says, here it is, do whatever you like to do with it. I will be back in a year and I want to see what you did with it. One of them takes the wheat and the flax and makes a loaf of bread out of it, which he shows a year later to his king and says, this is what I did with what you gave me, the ingredients you gave me, I made it into a loaf of bread. The other one didn't do anything at all, left the flax and left the wheat, and obviously by the time that the king came back, nothing is left of it. Says, if you look to the end of this particular statement made in Eliyahu Sutta, one of the earlier Midrashic literatures, now when the Holy One blessed thee, he gave the Torah to Israel, he gave it only in the form of wheat for us to extract flour from, and flax to extract a garment. Saying it differently, what this Midrash is saying is, when the Torah gave, or when God gave the Torah, it was not completed, it was only the beginning of the very existence and the production of the Torah. The Torah is the point of departure, and it is not the arrival. What you read in the text of Shabbat is only the point of departure. This is how it was at the very beginning. But now we have to work on that text, still make sure that that text is becoming available to us and applicable to us. And that is what the man does when he takes the flax and he takes the wheat and he makes a loaf of bread out of it. But if you don't do that, and you leave the text for what it is, it will be gone. It will be meaningless. It will be totally irrelevant. Now here's the chidush. The chidush which the rabbis make is that God does not give the second Torah 1,000 years later, but he says to the sages, I gave you the flax, I gave you the wheat, you better start working. And that is what is happening in the Talmud and in the Mishnah. And they start to work. And they do the most radical things, and you know that. Because they have a pasuk, and they say, no, it must mean something different than what it seems to say. Ayin tachat ayin, eye for eye. It means financial compensation. Ir hanidachat, the whole city has to be completely destroyed. That is only the departure. And they come to the conclusion, for moral reasons, for whatever reasons there are, they come to the conclusion that they now need to develop a system by which they take the flax and the wheat and they make a great loaf of bread out of this, and doing that requires that they sometimes even violate the text, which they quite often do in the Talmud. When they say it doesn't mean me eat this, it means something completely different. We call that in Hebrew harama, which means something like basically saying that things are not the way anymore as they are. There are what we call halachic loopholes. We find a way out. We do this very often. In halachic literature, it is full of it. We find ways how to show that a mamzer is not a mamzer. Sometimes these particular arguments are a little far-fetched. But within the Jewish tradition, it's not far-fetched. That's exactly the flax and the wheat, which needs to be developed. Now let me say something more here. And that is this, very closely related. When the Jews received the Torah at Sinai, in whatever way, They received it in their infancy, when they were still, spiritually speaking, children. Children need to be helped left and right like a baby. So God interferes and God writes everything down for them and He does miracles for them and He does all the things which are required. But when they are slowly growing up, they now have to take that Torah and start to work on it, like the flax and the wheat, and make something out of it which agrees with something else, my dear friends. And it is Professor Yehuda Gelman sitting here who wrote a whole book about this. Me'et Hashem asita zot. That when morality enters into this world, sometimes via non-Jewish sources, we need to take them into account because it is higher morality, and now with that higher morality, which is also min hashamayim, is also coming from heaven. God interferes in our lives and tells us now that the new morality, and not all morality by the way, and I won't go into all the problems here, will have to be applied to the text, so that you now are using the flax and the wheat in a way that it will produce exactly that kind of loaf of bread, which is now necessary for the new conditions in which the Jewish people find themselves once they have grown out of their infancy and they slowly grow up. So what does the Talmud, for example, do? I give you one example. Out of many. The Talmud says the Ir Hanidachat, the whole story, the whole city, which has to be completely destroyed by fire, because everybody was involved in idol worship. Should that even really happen? So the Talmud already says it never happened and it will never happen. It completely pushes it aside in some heaven. It says no, this is only a theoretical idea. How do they get out of this? Hear this. How do they get out of applying it? And they are sure that it was never applied? Hear the argument. Unbelievable. Which many people completely misunderstand. They say it can't be that the whole city needs to be destroyed. You know why? Because no doubt there must have been a mezuzah in that city. Which Jew has no mezuzah on his door, even when he's involved in idol worship? But there is a Torah law which says you're not allowed to destroy the name of God. And the name of God is being written in the mezuzah, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the four-letter name. So then we can't destroy this particular mezuzah, which means to say that not everything can get destroyed, and therefore, say the sages, it means that we should not destroy anything at all. Now you may say to me, that's far-fetched. No, my dear friends, this is exactly the flax and the wheat. This is the way how they developed things and found ways, because they said that can't be. There are or moral standards, or the religious standards, and therefore they did away with the whole text. By the way, the same thing you know about the Ben Zoreh or More, the son who is rebellious. The rabbis just state over there, it never was and never will be. Why? Because the meaning is totally different. It is the message which this mitzvah gives, not the application of the message. The rabbis say you should darish, you should look into that particular story and learn also those are moral issues from that, but it's not to be applied. And they constantly do that, and that is completely within the way of thinking about the Torah as the Torah should be thought about. So therefore, moral problems in the Torah, also issues, may quite be well totally different than the way as we normally understand them to be. The text, you know what I say, demanded its own fundamental renovation. We leave the text in the Torah, in the Bible, in the synagogue, the way as it is. But what the rabbis did is, this is flax and wheat. Let's work on it. Let's use the new moral insights which we have. And again, this is a very complicated story when we should and when we should not, and we will not go into this now. But the principle is there, and that's the way how they apply it. The Torah is given in flax and in wheat to make bread out of it. We need to transform it so that Israel, which at the time when it was given a few thousand years ago, was still living in infancy, by now, hopefully, lives a little bit of a higher level when it comes to certain morality, which the sages already understood. All this is not in contradiction to the concept that the Torah may or may not have been given all to Moses at Sinai. But I'm only saying there are others who say that only part of it was given by Moses to Moses at Sinai, and not everything, because the prophets also had part in the very creation of the text. And now you understand why they had that possibility. Because God says, we are making the Torah together. I'm not the only one who giving the Torah. You who is receiving the Torah have a way, have an obligation to work on that text. And that's what Moses does when he introduces certain things within the text, which God afterwards sanctifies and says, okay, I'm fine with it, because we are liking this together. I have one more little critique for you. What did the Jews hear at Sinai? They heard the Ten Commandments, right? In the Talmud, the first two. Well, there is a Hasidic thinker by the name of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Rimanov, very famous thinker, who says that they only heard the Aleph of the word Anochi. I am the Lord your God. And in according to one reading of this great Hasidic thinker, the Aleph which they heard did not even have a vowel under it. Not a kametz, not a segol, nothing. They only heard the Aleph. Has anybody of you ever heard an Aleph? Nobody. Because there is no pronunciation of an Aleph. Only when there's a kamatz under it. So what is Menachem saying? They didn't hear anything at all. So what is going on? And there's a lot of discussion about that, and I shall not go into this now. But one way of understanding is that what they heard was by way of some kind of telepathy. They heard it within their hearts, not out there, God speaking to them as we normally understand it, but there was something happening within their very being, which translated itself in the form of all these very commandments. How it all happened, says the Jewish tradition. Very interesting, that Menachem Mendel. That's one way of looking to it. There are other ways of looking at it. Who is right? The answer is, we don't care less. The truth about it is all up to debate, and that is the beauty of the Jewish tradition. What we have is halakha, no doubt, and that halakha will depend on if you look into it like the Rambam and the Sephardim also do. But if you ask me on the end of the day, could it all be Mina Shamayim? The answer is yes. And that's got nothing to do with Bible critique, and that's nothing to do with archaeology, and it may quite well be that all the moral problematic stories in the Torah never happened, including Amalek, because it is the message which was of importance, and not actually whether or not it actually had happened. Now, to surprise you all together and to make sure that you don't sleep tonight, let's go to the very last source. It speaks to Gemara in Kiddushin. Number 16. Here the sages discuss the question about mamzerim. The question whether or not mamzerim that law will still apply in the days of the Messianic age. Says the Talmud like this: mamzerim and netinim, I won't go into this now what that means, will become pure in the time to come. This is the view of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda said in Shmuel's name, the halakha agrees with Rabbi Yossi. What this particular statement is that, reading it straight from what it says, that God at a certain moment in the Messianic age will do away with the law of the mamzerim. And if you now have understood what I said up to now, you will understand quite well why. Because there is no need anymore for this particular law. Why the sages were very careful about writing this is because of Christianity, because Christianity was making a claim that the Torah laws don't apply anymore already in our days. And the sages didn't want to hear of it, and they were quite right about it, because the Mashiach hasn't come yet. But if the Mashiach comes and we live on a much higher level, then the story is completely different. And then go to the second one. What it says in the Torah, or what it says in the Tehillim, Hashem matir asurim. God will, how do you say in English, loose up the ones which are bounded. Says the Midrash in Tehillim. What does the verse mean by the words matir asuri, loses the bound? Some say that every animal whose flesh is forbidden now as trefa, as non-kosher to eat, in this world, Hakadosh Baruch Hu will declare it in La'atik Lavo, in the future world, Mashiach world, that the eating of this flesh is permitted. Right in according to the Sforno. Right in according to saying, there is no need anymore for this. My dear friends, it does not mean, and I repeat this again, that you can now start eating non-kosher. It means that there will be a day, and according to this view, that indeed the whole kashrut laws are no longer applicable because they are meaningless by that time. That doesn't mean to say that God did not give them at Sinai. It just means to say they were given in the historical context of the moment in which the Jews happened to live. And that's the way how we need to look to the Torah and the question of Torah min hashamayim. The Torah is a frozen text. Put into history. Or it is a text like the Kabbalists say, which you can cut up differently so that you get all together different text on a higher level, as the translation of God's word. But what it is ultimately is the fact that when we ask the question what is true and what is not true, and how do we understand it, was it all written by Moses at Sinai? Was it partially written later by the prophets or by the Anshe Knesset HaGedulah? The response to that is, it doesn't matter. Because ultimately it is to be seen as the Word of God. I will make one last observation, and that's really only the beginning of a long story which I obviously can't go into now. You know what I always am astonished by is that when we read the Torah in the synagogue and we read these words which came down from Sinai, prophetic words from Moses, from somebody else, from later prophets, why don't we faint? Because after all, these are the words of God. What more else? Why are we not so overwhelmed that we can't keep them alive? Like the Jews at Sinai said, if you, Moses, continue, or better, if God continues to speak to us, we will all die. The question is, why don't we say the same thing when we hear the text? Stop with the text. It's too much for us. We can't manage this text. It only means that we have been so secularized that we don't even understand anymore what this text is all about. Whether or not the text came this way to us or that way to us, if it means this or it means that, it doesn't matter. From the Jewish religious perspective, it is a divine word. Whether or not Louis Jacob was right, he lived his whole life, an Orthodox life, and perhaps he knew that indeed this is the truth. We have to take it very serious. What exactly we need to believe? There will never be an answer to that question. In the meantime, we have to live our lives the best way and according to what the Jewish tradition requires from us, and that's no doubt the halakha. Also in the halakha itself there needs to be, and you know this from me, a lot of changes to be made to update it to the conditions under which we live today, especially in the state of Israel and Medinat Yisrael, but that's a whole other story. The fact stays, we better take it serious. May we all learn Torah, may we all live Torah, may we all be deeply impressed by the Torah, and perhaps one day we will faint, and that will be the greatest thing ever to happen to us. Thank you very much.